Okay, scoping. All right. There we've got Justin in. Hello, Justin. Welcome to the class. Hope you've had a good weekend and a restful one.
Yeah, how's everybody doing?
Hey, Justin.
Everybody is just three of us. We've got James and we've got Dorothy. Mike, for some reason, hasn't probably made it back from Cleveland. I'm definitely missing him. Used to be around in most of the classes earlier. Um, anyway, let's see, where are we now? We'll be looking at data, types of data, something to do with analytics, what it is, just to give you a sense of what could be involved in analytics. It's not like a whole subject, it's just small bits and pieces, uh, kind of getting you acquainted. So let's look at the definition. It's something that you obviously can look up in the book, but here it is in the slides just to um, give you an idea what we mean by data and data research. I don't want to have to go through it. It's very simple. It's easy to read. Data value is very important because data is information and it is loosely used here because information can be numbers, it can be a memo, it can be observation. It's something that you extract, excerpts that you collect. All of that is information, but translated as data when we are dealing with some of the qualitative and quantitative aspects of data. Um, so just so you know that the data value will depend on its source. That will define if it is reliable, if it is well vetted, if it is got a reference to it, and there's a research behind it, or there's some validity to it. So there is a sense of reliability, or there's a degree of reliability you want to ensure that is there for that info or that data. Then relevancy, relevant to the issue or the problem, accuracy of it, they're all interrelated. If it is current, fresh, up to date, purposeful, and objectivity is there. Okay. So this is from the eyes of a researcher who is going to use that info and data to move further and to do the analytics or analysis later. So what we'd like to start with today is this slide. Okay, so we'll look at data types, we'll look at data collection methods, and then finally some analytics that can be done on them. Analytics can be performed on qualitative and quantitative data. So if you look at one, you can see the data types are broadly uh, defined or separated as qualitative kind and the quantitative kind. Quantitative is numbered and you have some numerics there, whereas qualitative is something that has more aesthetic, more, of uh, a kind of observation related, your thoughts, your opinions, your reviews, you know, and so on. So that gives somewhat a difficult position for a researcher to translate it into quantitative values so that it can be interpreted in a formula within some formula, or the analytics aspect of it might be slightly different. so that there is a method to it, and the methods are put inside the box. Like 1.2.1 is identified with qualitative data, which we would say could be binary, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. These are some of it, and there are many more layers to what we have or what is covered in this subject. Quantitative is continuous and discrete. So these are the two kinds, and broadly speaking. And then when we do our analytics or we do our collection, we have to define, differentiate, and analyze it from the perspective of it being either quantitative and qualitative. And mixed method involves both type of analysis, because in one go or one collection, one observation, there could be some partially quantitative data and partially qualitative data collected. So those, when we start to use them together, it's called mixed methods. Methods is the word used for analytics purely, or how you are going to identify the different types within mixed methods, which are again quantitative, qualitative, you know, so there's sub layers to it. So those are mixed methods. And then we can also look at the data collection methods, which is observations, surveys and polls, interviews, focus groups, document studies, case studies. So we'll, go through each one of them just to know what they are supposed to mean. So this box, and this box, this is what we'll be discussing today. And if the time allows, we'll do a bit of data sampling. Okay. Um, the qualitative data, by definition, um, it is the information that is non-numerical in nature or cannot be quantified easily. Easily is the word, but it is quantifiable, and there are ways to do that. And we'll learn about how we can do it by looking at some of the ways surveys are done, which collects both different types of qualitative and quantitative. So we will examine it. Examples of qualitative are personal observations, emotions, sentiments, interviews, opinions, and suggestions. Quantitative obviously is numeric in nature, easy to work with because the values it gives is kind of, um, there is no ambiguity in that because the numbers they speak for themselves. Um, the quantitative are height, sizes, measurements, dimensions, etc. Anyway, when we move forward, we look at quantitative data types first. So generally, why are we doing this, or why do we need to understand the nature of the data in quantitative terms? Is because there is different methods applied to the type of numbers we get. Some numbers have the tendency to be accurate enough that they can go in decimal points or the accuracy level is higher. Discrete is also a good number, except that these are whole numbers and they don't have anything in decimal points, or they are not fractional. Like continuous data, for example, could be, let's just look at the examples and you would know what it means. Get the definitions. A Formula One race can come down to milliseconds between the placing that the drivers that complete the race. So it could be something like 1 meters in 12.34 seconds. So this is pretty much, it has numbers which can be mixed in terms of how they are quantified into meters and seconds, and the distance covered against the time taken. So these are what we call continuous data. And this type of data, when you are doing analytics, you will see the charts are different when you're using continuous data, or the fields in which you're going to fill in for the numbers that are identified at continuous data will only take the numbers which fit into the definition of continuous data only. And in any case, you can see that the terminologies that we are using could be of use later on when you actually start to do analytics yourselves. So let's just say continuous data is what I just told you. Then we've got discrete data, which means that it is not divisible in any case. Things like, numbers of children. It is giving an example. You cannot say that there were 2.5 kids or 1.3 pets. Also, discrete data cannot be broken down into smaller data values. So when you design a questionnaire and you have something that works with discrete data with answering yes or no, big or small, um, and so on, you can actually be using discrete data. So discrete data is yes or no, male, female, etc. And that's just the way we are going to quantify and use these two different types in our analytics. And these are, and then in continuous data, you have other types also, which is the subdivision of continuous data. There's even more granular form of what could be continuous data in different circumstances or in different types of questionnaires that you can apply. Same way with discrete data. So this is quantitative data. Next, we are going to look at the qualitative data and see what are the different types of qualitative data. Can be binary, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So let's just look at them. Never mind this chart over here. I don't want to cause any confusions. Let's just take one at a time. What is binary data? Binary means in qualitative sense that it has two exclusive or mutually exclusive categories. Right or wrong, true or false, accept, reject. But these are not numbered, you see. These are just qualitative in nature. So right and wrong, true and false. This is just one type which we call binary. Binary means two data. For anything to be analyzed, it has to have values more than one to compare with, or for you to you know make a distinction. So this is binary, means two mutually exclusive categories. Now, there could also be a situation where the data collected is considered a nominal data. We call it nominal or unordered data. Um, these are set of values that don't possess a natural ordering. That means there is something very exclusive about the values given or attributes attached to something. For instance, if it is a color of a phone or any different colors that you are talking about to select from, let's say, and each color is unique, like brown will always be brown, gray will always be gray, red will always be red. So how many reds and how many blues can be something that can be computed or calculated. But when there is a questionnaire which is talking about unordered data, usually it is the specific attributes that are only the, that cannot be broken down or cannot be compared with, or something that is exclusive. So examples of nominal data is shown here. What color here do you have? Brown, blonde, black, all this. What is your nationality? These are the type of questionnaires that are using nominal data. Okay. The other kind we call ordinal data. Ordinal data means that here you are able to give a value or a distinction in terms of what is greater, what is less, what is big, what is small. So a small, for instance, is less than medium, and medium is less than large. So logically, it can be computed and it can somehow work better than unordered data if you would give someone the value to distinguish between small, medium, and large, that is considered an ordinal data or ordered data. So that means there is some order to it. And unlike unordered data, which is exclusive and cannot be compared um, for having its own branding or if its own value, that is unordered. So ordinal, as you can see, can be distinguished. Example of ordinal data or ordered data when you are designing a questionnaire. Example is like, the scale 1 is to 10 reviews, or questions like recommend our services to your friend, very likely, neutral. These are the examples. And this way you can tell that this is what we call ordinal data. Okay. Then we have interval data. Interval data means that you have to collect information or data which alone or just by itself as a single value is not good enough to interpret or to infer or put any logical conclusion to, unless you have a collection of the data or the numbers that together will give a collective value that can be considered to have or is considered interval values between other numbers for the same event or the same sort of situation or collection of the information from one single object, except that you need number of information bits to collectively give it a body or a form that can be considered as good enough for the analysis or analytics in terms of making a decision uh, of different sorts. So for example, if it is a score like I don't know, in Olympics you see, there is a diving score for the athletes, and each athlete has to do a number of, I guess, acts to be able to finish up with the score, which is the collective score of each of those performances together for the judge or for someone to come up with the results. The example of interval data is scores like 6.0, 6.5, 7.0, 7.5. So this is where it helps the judges to make a definitive decision, because the nature of a situation is such, or the nature of event, or the type of event is such that it requires all those scores to be put together. So this is what we call interval data, and sometimes it's very hard to do the quantitative analytics. This is actually a quantitative data type, um, and it should not be placed here, but close to where we have the quantitative analytics or quantitative data. So this is a kind of quantitative data. Ratio analysis, ratio data is what is one thing against another, how many times one is different from another, or there is a fixed point which can be considered as a point where the deviation needs to be calculated from. So scoring 40 points has twice the value of scoring 20 points, right? So the ratio is 40, you put a colon sign and they put the number 20. That's what the ratio data is. That's just few of the ways in which the data itself will have the kind of or the nature to it that would impact your methodology on how you're going to do analytics, because numbers will also define your um, coming from the surveys, collection of information, um, type of questions, qualitative, quantitative, coming down to a point where you have a collection of data, but now you have to sort them out, and then do analytics for qualitative versus quantitative, or you can do those analytics independently for the two types of scales of information. Now, something that we have not discussed and we don't even have it in the book, it's out of our scope of our course. It's called a data management plan. This is a very well laid out plan that we create for analyzing the data, because we have to sort the data first. And then we have to look at what methodology would best fit in, or where these numbers or these qualitative aspects of information needs to be analyzed. That requires a data management planning. Okay. Which is something that you may, if you feel that you need to look up more, you can write this term data management plan in Google and figure out. There is a lot of information on the internet about this. The data types and data collection methods. So data collection methods are some of these ones that we are going to mention today. You can assume that they are going to work just the same if you're doing it on the internet, because now you can do observation techniques by looking at some videos or something that you have collected, through event that you can view on the internet, and that could be part of the observation. Surveys and polls you can do online, interviews you can do online, focus groups. Document study is slightly different, and case study may also be different, but it can be related to, the social media, for instance, and that would be coming from the internet side. But because these are the methods, or these are some of the more discussed data collection method these days, that's why we are going to look at them from the traditional perspective of what it means, from the based on the nature of how we do the collection in all of these instances. For instance, in observation techniques, it is one of the things about observation is that you can be biased, or you may have some preconceived thoughts or something that makes your observation biased. There is always this element. So when you're doing observation, it means that you're looking at something happening. It could be, a social experiment. Um, it could be your independent observation in a group somewhere, or in a special situation where the circumstances ideally are not orchestrated, but come in their original form, where you are making notes and you're doing your own personal observations. Always a good idea to have more than one person to do the observation, so there is no conflict, and at least a bias element is somewhat ironed out. That is that is the only thing in observations. When somebody does that collection of info or gives their opinion, um, the peers or those who are looking at your observation would want to, look at them with a little bit of a grain of salt, as they say. If it is surveys and polls, then of course it is more structured, where surveys are more detailed. It is more on the analytical side. It is a process, a procedure, a method to survey questionnaires. depending on the situation and the topic that is involved. Sometimes surveys require a careful evaluation of how you stage it, like you go in different steps. If it is a sensitive topic, the way you're going to put the questions would be different. If it is something that is personal, which you feel that people are reluctant to answer for, then you create questions that have a subtle way of bringing about enough information to you that you can make um, black and white of it, or you can have somewhat an idea of where the survey is taking you. In the situation of polls, it is usually very small questions, something that can be answered quickly, doesn't require a lot of effort from your subjects to answer them. And generally, it is not focused, it is kind of generalized kind of questions, which is not specific to a population or a targeted subject that you're collecting from. So those differences between polls and surveys are something that is very well defined in a chart. If you care to look at what we have in the book, you will see that, or maybe we have it here somewhere, you will see that this is something which comes as a pet question in the exams. So for that reason, I will point you to a chart somewhere. If I don't have it here, then I will show it to you in the book. No, it's not here. So I will tell you um, in the book, I have it somewhere. Here it is. On page 358, it is giving a differentiation between surveys and polls. And I've just explained it, in the general sense of what it means. But if you want to be more specific, you can see. You see, the type of question I generally notice in the exams is that they don't put the heading on top, which would differentiate polls and surveys, but they would have these attributes, which would mean that you should be able to, put the heading yourself, like which part is polls, which part is survey. Or they could just switch what is on the left to put it on the right without mentioning the word surveys or polls. They would expect that you would know what is considered attributes or typical um, differentiators between polls and surveys. So page 358 is something that I would say you can look up later if you'd like. It is important. Now I'm going to go back to, okay. Um, if you like, we can also use book a little bit. Let me just use it as a single page. Where is, magnify it a little. Um, There are two types of interviews. First of all, why do we do interviews? Is one of the methods um, that we apply for asking questions that are otherwise very difficult to answer through the surveys, or the interviews are very specific, or the type of interviews that has targeted audience or specific type of audience, because the subject matter is such that it has a value to you, uh, based on who your um, audience is. Uh, if it is something that is coming from a professional or someone who is of stature that um, would require for you to do investigative interviews or in-depth interviews, then the nature changes and the method of collecting the information changes also. Interviews are more intimate, it's interpersonal, and a lot of times it is done in cases where people otherwise don't open up much. And sometimes the interviews would lead to more questions if you don't know a lot about a subject and you want to find out more. You can do in-depth interviews. You can also conduct structured interviews. Structured interviews are more objective, and the questionnaire is already discussed beforehand with the interviewee and the interviewer. So those are structured interviews, but not as popular as in-depth, because the nature of or the reason why you do interview is to get in-depth information. So that is another way of collecting. But when you are actually, now I'm just talking about the practical aspect, like when we do interviews and they're not structured interviews, we'd like to follow the lead or follow something which brings more questions out of answers from the subject we are interviewing. So the more and more information or the new facts gets discovered through that, or the facts get validated through that. So that is the main purpose of the interview. But these days we do it uh, by recording it, and then we make memos, and then we apply something called coding. So the information set in cases, if you, even if except for the surveys, if you're doing focus groups or you're doing observations, there are two methods or three methods rather that we use to jot down or make points in order for it to fit into our research uh, framework. Um, for instance, there is something memoing and coding. We will talk about that, and there is journals. So when we finish up with these interviews or focus groups or something similar, we later sit down and we start to look at it from research perspective, and we apply those methodologies. That's where we actually are performing research, not at the time of interviews. That's not pure research. That is just collection of information. Okay. So I'm going to take a 10 minutes break right now, and I'll see you in a little bit, and we'll continue from here on. We'll do focus groups and we will do case studies and so on. So I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, shall we continue? You can hear me and you can see my screen, eh?
Yep, all good.
All right, thank you. I just looked at one example I thought would be useful. I looked it up on the internet because I don't have it in the book. It is showing what is memo and what is a code right here. So let me just click on it, see if it is showing. Okay, here we go. All right. If you look at the memoing is like writing something or something that you have collected as information. And you see this highlighted portion in memo. This part is actually highlighting a fact or something which is of importance for research reasons. And the code is what is going to define or talk about something that can be considered as derivation of inferences, or something that has a value but is given a code, like how many times certain situations are giving indication that it is, let's say, accepted, it is not accepted, or it is a value, less value. Um, but those are the smaller codes. But if you want to define it in a more structured way, you could write something like teacher's role influenced by personality. So this is one excerpt This is another one, which is expose teachers to technology over time. So these are codes, and how many times this occur would be an added information that would give a better results for research reasons to see how the group, if it was a focus group or it was a interview or it was something that you collected, uh, as your observation of freehand writing, you can correlate that with the codes that you give so that you don't, I mean, you cannot be just copying and pasting something like longer sentences, but the meaning of it would be concisely placed under a code, like expose teachers to technology over time. This was something that can be related to expose them to technology training over long period of time. So this could be a question or something part of your research, and so you have concisely placed it with less number of words, and the same situation can repeat itself, and the code uh, can be translated for, let's say, expose teachers to technology over time would mean that it could be given a code, let's say A, B, C, D, or any numeric numbers also, just so that analytics can be performed, like how many times this thing has occurred, or, and complaining about evaluating software, who's complaining, how many times, based on your results, your collection of information. So these are coded or concisely placed. This is not exactly how I would like it to be. I want it to be more elaborate, but this is just to give you an idea. But when you look at how it is explained in the book, you can see that it is giving you kind of a better sense of what I'm trying to explain here. But hopefully, you can make out what the difference is between the coding and memoing. So that's one way of moving forward with uh, with interpreting the information codes or extracting information, translating it into codes. Okay. I hope this makes sense. Complaining about evaluation, would evaluate on own time. These are just small statements, but this could mean that there could be more occurrences of the same. And these are the important aspects that you want to cover in your research. Uh, okay. Now let's look at focus groups. Focus groups are usually put together for different reasons. One is if the issue or the problem is such that you want to create a targeted focus group that contradicts or has different opinions to come up with the, again, depending on your research objectives. So they can be mm, discussions with different attitudes and people coming from different backgrounds, but relating to the same problem, or they could be the same issue, same problem, same background, and therefore the groups would have that homogeneity to make it more objective, depending on, again, your type of research. Document studies is plain and simple, looking up documents, books, journals, articles, opinions, everything that is available to you that you can study in depth, and you can make your own research through document studies. Case studies is scenario situations which are simulated as something which would define a problem or a case that you will be studying. There is something in case studies that is called ethnography. Ethnography means that it is a kind of a situation where you would want to put yourself in there to experience it, and you come up with the basic question, or your basic inquiry leads you to embed in that situation, and then make your notes and observation through a period of time as you become part of that situation or the environment, especially in social sciences. This is very common. Like people go and observe, make first-hand observations by putting themselves in the same situations or in the same environment. And over time, they collectively, starting from one basic question, would lead to more and more observations that can eventually end up uh, finishing up the research work um, with totally different um, um, questions that gets developed along the way, and you get different answers, and the research may take a different direction. So that's ethnography, and it happens a lot in case studies. That's And then the type of information you collect could be qualitative and quantitative also. So there is always a mixed approach to it. And depending on how you have positioned yourself to do that interpretation of that information collection, you will be able to see the usefulness or uselessness of that approach. So you may change your technique, but apparently these are some of them that you would start with and end with, but you have to look at the objective of your research to see what type of approach you want to take. Uh, or it could be an approach where observation is mixed with interviews, interviews mixed with case study, So it could be a mix of all these. But generally, these are the different ways or different types of observations or collection ways of collecting of information for quantitative and qualitative analysis. Or at least this is what we'll be covering in this section. Good. We have come to data sampling, and this is what I wanted to finish up. Now, data sampling is important because the information collection venues or the objects or subjects of your research might take a huge volume, or it may be a population of something from which you have to extract a sample to give it and to make it easier for you to use that sample as a representative sample to make your mm, to make your research sampling. There are two ways in which we do sampling. One we call probability sampling and a non-probability sampling. Probability means basically that it's a chance of what may occur or may not occur. You never know. And therefore, there is a method which makes your sample collection non-biased, where you want uh, to follow a method where nobody can point a finger at you saying that you were very selective or you had a bias for collecting those samples. And unless there is a method to it, it is not acceptable sampling method. It's not considered acceptable sample. So we look at what probability means, first of all, in order for us to examine what could be considered different methods applied. So as an example, if you had a population of 100 people, each person would have odds of 1 out of 100 of being chosen. So what it is saying is that it is a chance or a probability for which you don't have a control over, or there is a method where you would be selecting something out of a sample of 100. So the probability, another example, probability of head and tail. For instance, if you flip a coin, the probability is 50-50, 50% you'll get head, 50% you'll get tails. So that is probability sampling, and you don't control it. You just flip it, and then the physics takes control of it, and whatever comes down is considered a probability of getting a head or a tail. Non-probability is chosen, something that you proactively strive to put together as a sample, which is where you do something called recruitment or sample recruitment. And that is considered non-probabilistic. And lot of situations you do have to take this approach because probability is not workable as the sample objects or the sample subjects are difficult to get. So you proactively have to choose, especially in clinical trials, you have to go for non-probability samples. Okay. Um, in the probability sampling techniques, we will look at simple random sampling, stratified sampling, systematic, and cluster sampling. Okay. Uh, Let me use the book for this. Now, on the page 335, there is a chart, which is a valuable chart, and I would think that would help you a lot. And this is the one I'm talking about. In this one, you can see that there are different methods of data collection, and you could see that the approach of the type of data that you will collect would include mixed methods. So if it is surveys, you can create a questionnaire for um, quantitative and qualitative approach to designing those questionnaires for collecting a collection of data, and therefore it would apply mixed method approach in general, I say. And if it is interviews, you're mostly talking about qualitative aspects of data, and this would be best used for using memoing and coding. In the observations, it is mostly quantitative, but there is a qualitative aspect as well. However, it is, quantitative prevails more because you can quantify, like, you know, um, how many people, for instance, in the observation were buying burgers versus fries versus whatever else. So you can say that it has that quantitative aspect as well as qualitative. So I would say qualitative also should be included and it should be mixed method. But anyway, quantitative is more suitable. In focus groups, it's qualitative. In case studies, it's mixed method approach. But if you read through these two different columns, overall purpose, advantage, and challenges, it will give you a quick grasp of what it means and what is the type of data that or the type of analytics you will be doing. Um, the sampling, okay. There is simple random sampling. Simple random, I'll just explain it with examples. It's easier. Simple random, let's suppose it's the same example. It's very simple. If it is simple random means that example is exactly like um, 1 is to 100, for instance, chance of number one coming out of 100 is 1 is to 100. The 25 employees being selected out of a hat from a company of 250, each of the 250 employees would be assigned a number 1 through 250. So what is the chance of each employee being selected? um, 1 is to 250. So it is simple random sampling. It's like, a raffle ticket, just one winner, and that's simple random sampling out of the whole. But what makes things more difficult is when you are talk about stratified sampling. Stratified means that strata is a group or a collection of a subsample, something that you have identified from the population or selected from the population, but just one selection is not enough. So you're going to do one step selection first, and then you're going to call it a strata or a group. and then you're going to make subsets out of that, which will break it into more stratas or more groups. To look at it from the illustration right here, for instance, there is 1,000 employees in the population. 800 are females and 200 males. Right off, you can say that there is a ratio of 800 to 200, or 8 is to 2, or 80 is to 20, whatever way you look at it from the percentage perspective, it's 80% to 20%. So when you select 1,000 employees, you want to make sure that you keep the integrity of the ratio intact, so that there is some rationale to your taking the sample first. Right now, it is not really, you could say, probabilistic yet, but at least it has some method to it, which means you are going to collect it as a strata or the first group, which is right here, and then you will stratify it or make it into further stratas. So you're going to separate, let's say, 80 females and 20 males, which means that out of 1,000, now that your sample size has to be 100, you're going to maintain the ratio and create two stratas, one for female and one for male. And so now you have 80 is to 20 ratio, and you have 100 females, total of 100, out of which 80 females, 20 males. So two stratas are made. And this is a stratified sampling, easy example to put together. And out of these two, you're going to make a random selection. Here, you're going to do the probabilistic calculation. So out of 100, now if you group these two together and then randomly select something that would be considered as having a rationale in terms of sampling without bias. So now you have 100 employees from which you can make a selection, but you have maintained the 100 number as a sample size, and you have maintained 80 is to 20 ratio, so that nobody can say that you were more favorable in collecting more of females and less of males, or more of males and less of females. So this is stratified sampling. Sometimes you need to go, let me just use this one. Sometimes you need to go and do systematic sampling in certain cases, where assuming that this is a population and you have sample employees, sample that you select would have to be would have to have some order of how you collected that sample. So for example, there is randomly selected, let's say, X number of employees, and there are these numbers here. Let's look at the numbers. All employees of the company are listed in alphabetical order, so there has to be some order of how you're going to list the employees randomly. Male female doesn't matter, just that you have um, whatever numbers of 100 people, let's say, you have collected. So all 100 of these needs to have an order in which you would collect it. So you make a list of employees starting with the first name with A, so, and B and C and so on. And from that list, you are going to do a randomization in a structured way that would be somewhat similar to how your mode or median is done in statistical methodology, where you're going to take every 10th employee from that ordered list. So every 10th employee with the naming and everything listed in a structured way first, and then applying this method, which you have to document. So let's suppose it is every 10th employee that you have collected from this sample of employees, and this is in purple color is your first selection. And let's suppose every 10th employee is shown here in the yellow color. Let's say this is the 10th employee. So this is now become systematic, and it has become ordered, and it has become randomized, but uh, in a more structured way. And when you have got this yellow, the 10th employee, and you collect all of these and put it in the other strata, which means you have created one strata here, second strata here, third strata is right here in the red color. So this is a sample of 100 people you selected, which apparently you started with the population and you had systematically arranged them and then took every 10th one, and so they created a system of how you have collected it. And it is also one of these randomized probabilistic sampling techniques, but there is a method to it. And the sampling techniques are very important when you look at it from the point of view of the objective of your research. Sometimes you want to be very specific. You want to select something from one department, X number of employees in a systematic way or with a systematic sampling, and another from another department or management versus the senior executives versus the production staff. I'm just taking an example from the industry, if that is where you're doing your sampling. So every stage of it, every bit of it would create different stratas, and each strata would have an order to it. Taking an example further, let's suppose in a situation where you have to select, let's say, from a certain area which is wide enough or where the industry is spread with production and the head office and everything else in geographically distant areas, and it is physically not possible for you to cover everything, then perhaps you will select a group, let's say a production department, a localized branch, and a sales and support department. So three of them, let's say in one state or in the uh, you know somewhere in the Midwest is a different cluster, in the mm, Western United States you have a different cluster. So each of these clusters would have to have some commonality or some sense, um, based on what you are planning to achieve, and therefore your sampling would be different. Take an example of this one, which is, let's say, composed of three different locations within a certain geographic region. There is a production department in one region right here, and from here you have selected 23 employees, but coming from managerial positions. In the second group, you have 27 employees from production department positions, is production workers. So what is similar is shown at the top with the production development. These three are the development departments. And what is different or what is considered as something that you will be working on as a sample to have um, uh, uh, to have different positions, but from different areas or different locations, but the positions are different. Managerial position versus production workers versus supervisor foreman. So you are doing something called cluster or probabilistic sampling in cluster sampling situations. Cluster is this yellow thing that is surrounding it. So this is made into a cluster, and each of these would be having a sampling techniques that would work on the positions, which is managerial versus production versus supervisor. And each sample is collected from production department to give it that homogeneity or give it that similarities. And what is dissimilar is the positions. Okay, so this is cluster sampling. Then we have multi-stage sampling, meaning that one sampling is not enough, or there could be different stages of sampling at different times. Um, Different times means that it is an ongoing project, and you start in multi-stage. This is the population, and from the population, see, your end result is that you want to select schools in different states, but you don't want to appear biased, and therefore you're going to apply a multi-stage sampling techniques, which is kind of probabilistic and therefore has a method to it. So first instance, you're going to collect population of state. So these are all the states, let's say in USA, of schools. So and you're going to select the states in stage two, and from the states that are selected, you're going to select then schools, and then in the fourth stage, you have obtained the student sample, which, by the way, had a sampling or random sampling starting from the population first, um, and then selecting the states first, then selecting the schools, and then eventually using this sample as something that you can work on or you can consider as a representative of your research, or the mm, test sample that you're going to work on. So that's multi-stage sampling. Okay, and it is for very large populations or something which is as big as the school system in USA. Okay, so this is multi-stage sampling. Then we have got non-probability sampling. Non-probability means that you proactively look for the samples. You perform something called recruitment of samples, which means that this could be the kind of sampling which are not cannot be randomized. You have to be very selective of who you get, or it's hard to get those samples or for people to work with you as part of the group that you want to do research with or research on. So you might use approaches like convenience sampling, which means that there is one person that would, out of, let's say, one, two, three, four, five of these people who are your subjects of sample, but you feel that you have not collected enough people. So you're going to ask one of them to, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is when you have people in your close vicinity or in your group. So it is called convenience sampling. So one person in the group may get some more people. In voluntary response sampling, in the second one, there could be people who would volunteer based on if you give them some incentive, or there is a requirement for someone to sign up um, for something that is um, uh, that you cannot push the people, or you cannot convince the people to be recruited. For instance, if it is some kind of a disease or some sort of a unique situation where very small number of people possess that or have that condition and symptoms, you would ask them to voluntarily respond, and a lot of times you have to give some incentives to get those kind of people. um, Purposive is when you have a group where uh, there is a commonality, like mm, alcoholic anonymous groups, or people who have gone through certain situation and they are in the group support. There is a purposive kind of sample there, and it is usually uh, also partly volunteer based, but it is the group that you connect with or you connect through someone which has the commonality of things that as I mentioned, like drugs related, anonymous, or anything that is typically common between them. but they are in one group. Snowballing simply means that you ask one person to find some more for sampling like them, and for that, you reward them or give them some incentive. So they bring more people in, and so it grows that way. That's called snowballing sampling. But that's just a nomenclature or the terminology which differentiates. Basically, non-probability simply means anybody and everybody that becomes part of the sample is either conveniently obtained or have to have commonalities and homogeneity in terms of what is expected or what is related to them. And the snowballing is when a referral is involved, when you have more people to look for additional people to get into the group or become part of the sample. So that is non-probabilistic sampling. Um, Here is coding integrative diagrams. Focus. Okay. Then there's a lot of information, I think. Let's take a pause a little bit. So far, is everybody getting it? It's a lot of theoretical things. We just sort of discuss it quickly and give you an idea of what it is about. You can pretty much make out why sampling techniques are important, why data types can be important in doing analytics. All of that is answered, I believe, so far. And now we will just look at data analysis methods. So, James, Dorothy, Justin, so far, what do you think? Does it make sense? And have you been able to comprehend everything so far?
Yeah, it's going fine.
Yeah, I think for me, as you said, it's a good overview, and yeah, this is fairly new territory for me. Something I'm very interested in, though. So a good overview, but I'll definitely go back and review and just to consolidate the information. But I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it's a lot of, you could say, theoretical things, just something that has a lot of terminology here, a lot of names, lot of methods. So it is, I think, for one session, it is a lot of information to absorb. So sometimes I wish, it was a bit of a pause, or at least these subjects should be divided a little bit more in terms of time. Because if we do 2 hours of this subject versus, when we were doing search queries, that had a different dynamics of, how much of it can be absorbed versus, this lot of data or information. If you compare it for the with the with the timeline, this is a lot more information, compared to, like I said, the queries and all that. So sometimes I feel that we should spend less time on these type of subjects so that more can be absorbed. Anyway, I'll just look at what we have here and see if I can just skip a few slides to make it less intense, and then we'll catch up on it later. Right? So that's how I feel. So I'm going to change the subject a little bit for that reason only. Let's look at surveys. What are surveys? Surveys are questionnaires. There are two types of surveys, questionnaires. One is close-ended, then there is open-ended. When we are doing interviews, it's usually open-ended. That is the purpose of it. And a lot of times, if the interviews are not staged or they're not structured, you get a lot more information, even from focus groups. But with open-ended means that we ask a question. So, what do you think? What is your opinion? What do you say about this subject? So they're open-ended. They are not given a choice to select from the answers, right? Um, and so we call them open-ended questions. There isn't a much talk about open-ended questions because they're not as structured or as um, designed as close-ended questions. Now, the type of close-ended questions is really it's listed here, and this is just the terminology. Um, but behind these, or if you look at how these are formulated, you can see that these are more or less um, have a format to it. Let's put it this way. So what is dichotomous? What is Likert scale? Just looking at the visuals, when I share it with you, you would know what it means and how you would be answering the question in the exam, because they will just structure a question, or a survey question would be there, and they would say, can you match it against the type, or you can cross-reference it with the type of close-ended, so you could tell if it's Likert or if it is rating or ranking question. It is easy when you look at how it is set. I will share this with you. It's going to be in the book because these are a lot of examples, and I will just scroll it down and look at the surveys. Hmm. Here it is. So what is dichotomous? You could see it is just simple answers, yes or no, right? Yes or no, and mm, that's how they're set. So the format that you're looking at is typically what we use in designing close-ended questions. It is your choice to structure it whichever way you want, but the look and feel of it should correspond with the type that is identified as, say, dichotomous. Dichotomous means two answers, or answers that are definitive. It is not like it is got a true qualitative aspect to it. Um, it has something of the choice that you could see in preparing copy for the printer, which method. So the method is defined, identified as gluing, taping, stapling, and so on. This is dichotomous questions. Rating questions, you rate something. Uh, how often do you purchase lunch in the company cafeteria? Very frequently, frequently, occasionally, and so on. So these are qualitative in nature, and pretty much analytics would be, somewhat uh, similar to the methods applied in qualitative analytics. The Likert scale, you could see, and different situation demands different structures, right, of questions. Um, in the Likert scale, you could actually use different ways of getting the answers, because the answers may not be absolutely translated in numbers, but you are trying to get some sentiments out of this one, but you want to add slightly more additional information that you require by posing it somewhat uh, in this format. Like here, it is agree, disagree, somewhat, or agree. So one, two, and three. And here you have questions like consumers like you, companies in your country, creating jobs in your country. So when people are finding it difficult to answer a question, or they're pretty much neutral on a subject, and you want to nudge them or push them in a direction where they are forced to answer or give something out, you may want to, like somewhat, for example, somewhat is not a good answer. Okay. But you can correlate it with an additional or questions or number of questions, like consumers like you, somewhat. And the question is, overall, do you think trade globalization is good for consumers like you? Okay. For companies in your country, and so on. So the answer would now have a body, or would have more meaning, or they'll be pushing someone to actually go beyond just the disagree, somewhat agree, and agree. So this becomes a Likert scale. Okay. Call it Likert scale. Ranking questions. If your company required you to transfer to one of the following cities, what would be your order of preference? This could be an important question, but at the same time, you may want more than one answer in the same question. So what do? You give it a number, or give it a rating, or you give it a weightage. So the preference could be choice. I want to go to Denver as a first choice. I want to go to Chicago as a second choice. And the numbers that you will restrict is one and two. That means you only have two choices, the first one and the second one. So these are called ranking questions. Um, we do design survey questionnaires, and we spend a lot of time in crafting them. We do use all of these formats, but there has to be an objective, and there has to be a reason for building it or structuring it in these different formats. Checklist type of questions. This is the checklist. Okay. So there could be more than one answers here. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. So this is checklist type. You can, select more than one answer, or all can be answered. Fill in the blanks. And then open-ended questions. Open-ended question ask respondents to supply answers. No defined answers are given, so respondents are free to write what they want. Occasionally, we give these kind of questionnaires or questions which are open-ended, but they don't help much. Once we design a survey questionnaire, we try to stick to close-ended questions, which would give a parameter or give a choice of answers, and therefore are more useful to us. Yeah. So we will do. Hmm. Now, bit about qualitative data analysis. In qualitative data analytics, there are two theories. We call them theories. Theories actually are based on the approach to your research, and approach depends on the problem of research and the expected outcome of the research. So, and also based on that theory and the method, we apply the or we give instruction on how we're going to go about and create our strategy, if it is analytic induction or if it is grounded theory. Analytic induction means that the answer to questions can be easily obtained, or it could be something that would involve either observation, social experiment, memoing, something that is ongoing or is going on, for which you can collect the information right away, or where there is a time limit to, or the event is ongoing, and you can use that data or collection of information that can be done at the same moment. Okay. So that is analytic induction, but grounded theory is a little bit different. It does not have a definitive approach to problem solving because the complexity of the problem is such that it requires for someone to start with, and I think I mentioned this, start with a question or a generic type of research problem which requires to actually embed with the situation for over a period of time to gather data and information. And it would take the research where it started from one question and it would open up more questions based on the experiences or over time, what takes place. So it is not only observation, but it is actually living, breathing, and being part of that event for a longer period of time. Um, the As a research begins to gather data, the core theoretical concepts are identified, tentative linkages are developed between the academic core concept and the data. The early phase of the research tends to be very open and take months. Later, the researcher is more engaged, verifying and summary and summarizing, and the effort to tends to evolve. So, grounded theory is more intense, more long term. So, there is a difference in collecting qualitative or conducting qualitative data analytics. When your approach is or the methodology you're applying is analytic or grounded theory. So this is the differentiation. Coding, we talked about memoing, example I gave you. Integrative diagram are things like cause and effect diagrams, brainstorming diagrams, if you are describing even anything in making cartoons or just scribbling something that is connecting the dots on a piece of paper, those are integrative diagrams. But integrative diagrams have a structure and a format which is um, which depends on what approach you take. So there could be different ways of or different types of diagrams you can create. But I've seen researchers just making dots to connect, and they make small designs and connects through arrows, one event with another, one thing or one piece of information with another. So those are integrative diagrams. And these are the three ways in collecting or doing your observation information. Analyzing quantitative data. So, measure of center tendency, mean, mode, median. This part is something that we can talk about later because then it will become more intense. I would like to leave it for the next lecture, but for the time being, let's just change a little bit the subject and go to web-based experiments. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to focus on some of the terminologies that you may find in the exams. There would be two types of surveys um, according to the span of time involved. There is cross-sectional surveys and longitudinal surveys. So by definition, um, cross-sectional surveys are questionnaires on topic at one point in time. For instance, a research conducted cross-sectional survey asking teenagers' view on cigarette smoking in May. So any surveys that is on the ground at certain period of time that can be finished and concluded right away, asking questions and getting the answers, where the survey can be concluded with one person within one session. That is cross-sectional surveys. Longitudinal surveys are the ones that are dependent on time. So if the event is evolving or one situation is changing from one point to another. um, and you need to have a longitudinal surveys which will carry on to come to a conclusion eventually, because things or events, one is dependent on another or one is followed by another event, and therefore the survey would take place at different points in time. That is longitudinal surveys. So that's the difference between cross sectional surveys and longitudinal surveys. uh, Definition of what is uh, virtual in ethnography. Ethnography is the word that is frequently used in research. Ethnography refers to an ethnographic research approach carried out in the online settings. The ethnographers interest studying culture. Okay, ethnographers, this is exactly like grounded theory. So there is no difference. A grounded theory is embedded in ethnographic approach or ethnography, which means that you are interested in studying culture, often engage in field work to immerse themselves in the culture they are studying. Okay. In the same way, virtual ethnographers study online communities and culture and conduct their research on the World Wide Web. So this definition, I just um, read it to you so that you can remember. This would be part of the exam as a terminology that pretty much it comes quite often. Clinical trials not as important. Web-based experiments are social experiments. Okay. So they are same as observations, or observations can be become part of the web-based experiments or social experiments. Okay. All right. So we are going to do a standard deviation, mean, mode, median. Those are quantitative analytics, and they go back to your statistics, a subject you must have studied in your high school days. Nothing complicated there. Quantitative is far easier. We are not looking at different formulas or applying calculus and other type of computations, which these days nobody do it with. They do it using the softwares. So it is not something that you have to calculate or work with, or even in the exams there is no question coming for you to derive results by actually doing computations of mean, mode, standard deviations and things like that. So it's just for you to get familiarized, to get an understanding of what statistical analytics means in terms of quantitative data. We'll do it in the next session, otherwise it'll get even more intense. Let's look at the module 3. We can start with module 3. This is talking about business of research and research in business. I'm going to use my slides to come to this or start with module 3. Okay, so let's run these. So, in order for you to do your own research business or become a research specialist, there are a few things that needs to be answered. And this subject is for those that are planning to start their own research business. They are curious about things like, how to put the business together. Here we'll not talk about, how to form a company and, the basic stuff of how put the business together. We look at it more objectively to learn what are the different essentials or different things that is expected to be part of your, um, you know, part of your uh, preparedness to start your independent research business, and what is the expectation of the client, generally speaking. And this is all based on our experience, and a lot of our volunteers that come from doing their own research businesses, or those that work as professional researchers, they contributed quite a bit in this in these chapters. So let's start with the readiness for online research work. Here we have all these, I guess, bullet points, you could say, that is surrounding the framework, or which is part of the framework, that includes, you know, uh, some of the things that you need to know as a before going independent as a researcher. Um, First of all, you have to be very selective in how you would bundle your services, or how you would look at yourself as having expertise in certain specialized areas. You can be either a knowledge specialist, or someone who is got who's coming from a certain industry with the experience, like coming from legal side, or having expertise in technology, whatever that may be, or part of your background, or your professional background rather, that would specify as a specialized area uh, of research. And then there are others want to just switch their careers and become a generalist in research work. The differentiation is that generalist would do all sorts of research without having that niche or specialized area for bundling their services. Uh, as a generalist, there are so many researches that are considered commonly mm, sought after, or for which you can get ready work as a generalist. So we'll discuss that. But when you are starting your business and you're putting your services together, you need to define that. Where to search for information on the internet? Obviously, you would have to have your own library built in for different um, research tools that you would be using, specialized search engines, reference guides that you have to be prepared to know where you need to go and get certain, because you never know what type of research you will be asked to go for. If it is to do with business intelligence, then you would want to look up LexisNexis, see if you have subscription, or you should know different places where you can subscribe to the database. Some paid, some you can get easily, government agencies. So all of that needs to be collected so that you are prepared. It's not like all of a sudden you get a research work and then you will be running around looking for ways to get to that information. So a good library of that is important, and a good knowledge and references that you can collect beforehand is always useful. How to search for relevant and reliable information means that you should be able to verify, identify, and quantify whatever the requirement is. It needs to be vetted and it needs to be validated. And the differentiation between primary, secondary data, and if it is primary, you know that it is reliable. Relevancy means that you have to keep your nose on the objective of your research and make sure that it is objective enough and it is relevant enough to your research. That sense you need to have, and you need to focus, especially on online research. There is a tendency to drag yourself, or anytime you find something of your personal interest, you sort of deviate from your focus search, and that takes away a lot of time, and time is money. So relevance and reliability is important. How to identify fake and biased. Now, in this area, there is some specialization required. If you are to do due diligence, background checks, um, um, do some evidence collection, you need to do some work as a PI. You need to have a little bit of knowledge of the tools and utilities that can identify and validate certain type of files or information within files, especially in multimedia and news. That part needs to be checked or validated. So there is a science to it, and I wrote a book on this. It's called Online Investigative Research. It's similar to OSNIT, which a lot of people are familiar with the terminology. It's open source intelligence network. and that has different tools and different ways of verifying info, especially online internet-based info. But online investigative research has added to the OSINT. It's in a book called, which I haven't put in your Dropbox because that's not the subject we are covering. But if any one of you require that, I can give that book to you. Then we've got how to collect, tabulate, organize. So collection of information is one thing. The ability to organize it, in data mining, you need to do that in your ability to be able to organize that data in a more structured way is important before you can actually go and run the analytics. It needs to be tabulated and organized, and there is a form um, or there is a format that you should be familiar with and how to do that. How to write research reports. This is also very important. You should be very good at writing it in a professional way. There is a widely accepted um, structure to how you write your research reports. Industry-wide, it is acceptable only if you have approached or written your research report in a certain manner. So, to your ability to write those research report is also important. Derive inferences and conclusions. A lot of times we are not supposed to do that, but if something of the nature of academic paper or anything that requires your expertise or your expert evaluation, then perhaps conclusions or inferences can be derived, but you generally leave it to your client to do that. Then you've got ability to conduct online investigative research work. Like I said, it is somehow similar to how to identify fake and biased info. So ability to conduct online investigative research would cover the forensic part or something that can easily be um, identified without doing the hardcore forensic on the hardware side, but using certain tools which would right away be able to actually, or the approach or methodology which you will adopt that would be able to identify real from fake and also validate certain information, and where you have to do collection of digital evidence, and you want to appear as an expert witness, you should have the ability to do online investigative research work because you never know what kind of research work you end up getting. So having the ability to write queries and do your research, generally speaking, with the CIRS credential, there is an added um, expertise or skills that you can acquire in the second level, or if any one of you choose to do investigative research, due diligence, asset discovery, and something of that sort, you can, with this knowledge, you should be able to take those kind of research work. Familiarization of important cyber laws and ethical issues of internet. Obviously, makes sense where you should know your boundaries to how much of the information you can use, reuse, share or not share, what is considered intellectual property, what are different types of uh, laws that pertain to trademark, IPs, like copyrights. Um, and anything that would mitigate any kind of risk that would prevent you from getting into legal problems as a researcher. So what are some of the important cyber laws you have to know of? Uh, and when you are collecting the information, there are laws to what part can be private and what part can be public, what information you can share or not share, what is your obligation to the clients, um, the human subject that you take for sampling or for recruitment of samples, what kind of legal papers you need to sign as something that requires a disclosure, um, and so on and so forth. And ethics, of course, there are ethics of internet that is expected for you to follow as a researcher. You should be aware of that because there is all sorts of information available online, and there are certain obligations or moral values that you have to stick to if you are in the North American region, where you need to be mindful of those ethical issues. Then you have to have a sound knowledge of conventional research methods and methodologies. This is what we are covering right now. We call them conventional or traditional um, uh, research methods, sampling and data analytics and so on, and some of the terminologies that we got familiar with. And you have seen how this part is displayed in response to, uh, uh, you know, response to the, what is that? Research proposal or RFP. I think we covered that, when we were looking at how the response to the research quotation or the those papers would identify very clearly what is the use of all of these different ways of quantifying qualitative, quantitative, data type, analytics, all that needs to be defined. So it's part of your proposal and also your research report. Knowledge of specialized online search and research tools, utility in specialized search engines. These are the tools that you need to be equipped with. All of these are stated or actually given to you as a reference or a booklets that you have in your Dropbox. It is kind of a library or a reference that you can quickly use to go and find specific tools to assist you in your research work. So all this, and then how to perform precision search with query operators, notation, and symbol. And that's what module 2 is mostly about. We've covered this part. So with this, you can now consider yourself ready, or at least be able to put together all these attributes as the essentials or the much needed knowledge for you to go independent and do the research or offer your research. What are my research outsourcing risks? So if it is a client sitting on the other side and is looking to hire a research specialist, how would or what would the client be thinking? What are the common risks that the client would want to minimize in selecting or outsourcing research work? Let's look at that one by one. Experience, your background, subject knowledge is one, which makes sense. What are the previous work references? Here's another one. So, as far as work references, I think you can take up or work with other research specialists once you've got credentialized with CIRS. Um, you would have, or you can work as a subcontractor, because remember, in research work, a lot of times, m- in fact, most of the times, these research companies, they don't have enough people that are on their payroll on permanent basis. It's only because a lot of time research work gets seasonal and it scales and downgrades with time. So a lot of times, research requires for them to hire a specialist or hire more workforce, depending on, when they have a surge of requests for research. Another thing is that a research in itself, if it is a long-term research, it scales and then diminishes and scales and then, starts to decline. So it becomes more like a fluctuating situation. And because they don't have permanent staff or they don't carry a lot of permanent staff, they would like to look for those that can assist them or other researchers that would join them on demand. So there is these opportunities, and so for whatever money they pay you, if you want good references or something that at the beginning of your research work you would like to have um, in your profile, uh, some work that you have done, performed, or with someone, that would help a lot. And then there are ready uh, work available all the time, especially for generalists. If you go on websites like Upwork, ResearchGate, Ask Wonder, they're hiring. Most of the time, they're hiring people to do short researches, on-demand researches, and so on. So that could be a quick reference if you want to work at far less price at a very competitive rate. But that's what it is all about if you go online and subscribe to platforms like Upwork. um, but it'll give you the reference. Can we trust giving business information? That is another question. So business information, when as much as you are involved in providing information to the client also shares a lot of information that is their internal, or their, mm, which requires NDA or non-disclosure also. So you want to be able to do that. And if you are doing surveys, because not many clients would rely on just any company or any researcher to conduct surveys, especially because there's a lot of companies that are doing fake surveys these days. It's very hard to get that reliability. The quality of data might be compromised, and there is a big scheme of marketers that also offer surveys, but they're not considered as reliable. And then there is another reliability issue of sharing data, which you would be paid for by the client, but you would reuse it, recycle it. So there are so many elements of trust that goes with it, with the preference that the client would have for someone would require a certain level of trust. Can we count on information and data reliability gathered for this is where I'm referring to surveys, and then your credentials or your qualifications to conduct certain type of interviews, focus groups, and whatever else you're using, including surveys. It requires for you to have certain background, certain training. So that could be another factor. What is the business background, size, and expertise? Common question anybody would like to know, because the business continuance or consistency in running a business is important. If you are just one person operation, then the client would be skeptical, would be concerned that if something happens to you, then what would happen to their ongoing research work. So if it is a firm with more than a few partners, or if it is an ongoing operation, it's been around for a while, and it has strength of enough people or expertise that would indicate or would be um, pointing to a business that seems to have a continuity to it. And if your business structure is, let's say, if it is a partnership versus limited liability versus S corporation, that would have an impact also. The liability aspect of a private company where personal assets are involved, especially in partnerships, that would be something that the client would be considering. If your company is a S corporation, then there would be other aspects that impose or has a legality surrounding it, which gives certain rights and gives obligations from the researcher's perspective, would have an impact in decision making by the client. Uh, then what are the business membership with trade organizations? If you are somewhat or someone who is partners, or your business itself as a business entity has some affiliations with companies, businesses that sort of are regulated for some in certain aspects of um, you know, running what you call a framework of quality of delivery, or there is something that would impose kind of restrictions and allows you to work within certain regulated rules and policies to remain affiliated with them, that would help. Who are the business partners, collaborators, affiliates? If you have agency of some software, like if we have affiliations with companies that had given us specialized training to run a certain type of softwares as a partner, or there are other companies or collaborators or franchisors that we work with, or reference with who else we work with, that would help. What is the business digital footprints, social media accounts, are third parties giving any opinions? Do you have, is there enough information on the internet that points in your direction to have so many people as followers, or so many of the interactions and connections with third party or outsiders that are interacting or somehow connected with you on the social media side? And that would be looked at, and that would be your digital footprint also. Are you contributing in digital magazines or any research papers or anything that is of prestigious value? And you have a digital footprint that identifies you as a contributor, that would help. Then how do the business website appear in look and feel? Of course, you need to have a decent website, your web presence, your bundling of services, revealing who the partner is, more information about yourself, about your career background, your clients, and so on. So it should be complete, and it should be enough information to know about where you are coming from or what the background of the business is. That information. Are there any third-party opinions, polls, reputation, rating, etc., that you have to work on and make sure that there is about enough out there? In Google these days, they're picking up ratings from different directions. Who knows where we are getting our ratings? I haven't been able to figure that out. But so far, we've got 5+ stars, and that's coming from Google. I don't know how they've done that, but that's given, or giving some strength to the credibility of the business. Are there any court cases or ongoing litigation against the business? Just to minimize the risk, the client might look and dig into that. This usually is a public information, and and therefore they would not hesitate to look it up and see if you are going through any, or somebody sued you, or there is a legal case pending somewhere. So this is before the client would hire you or would like to look at the outsourcing risks. So this is just an overview of what entails or what is covered in readiness, and how the client would look at it. So these are the 2 slides that I would finish today. I finished it, and I think we're pretty much done for the day. The next one is not as important. This is pretty much, I'd say it's the more of the same. Okay, but we'll go through it later. We'll go it. Let's see how much is there. Layout, online build comprehensive. Okay, this is just generic. Establish research area before you start your project. Establish research niche area. So you have to really consolidate and put everything, present it uh, in a more in the services section. So you have to do that. Layout, online presence. So you have to have a website. You have to have a business plan. Have to have a certification. Register with professional organizations. There's just standard stuff. Familiarize with typical outsource work. As a generalist, you might be asked to do things like data scraping, lead generation, online data collection, HR recruitment, opinions, polls, and surveys. So these are just one of those, low paying, but at least they are research in some sense, for quick contracts, for you to get from places like Upwork. Temporary contracts you can get from Ask Wonder, ResearchGate. These are just opportunities on the right hand side. These are opportunities. Place services with job sites as a virtual assistant. Um, Assist writers, those who are doing their research businesses, PIs. Start with low paying outsource portals. Consider contracting and subcontracting with established research businesses. This is A, B, C, D, nothing very special, but the previous two slides were important. And I'm assuming that you will remember all that, because a lot of it is not actually in the book, but for the benefit of students who are interested in running their business. And this is coming from the practical aspects, as I mentioned to you, from those who are already doing their research business. So that was a primer, or something that we finished up before we actually embark on starting with the business of research and research in business. This we will take, or we'll start with this slide onwards. Purpose of any professional business is, okay, never mind that. Never mind that. What is really important is a list of research reports used in businesses. We are going to connect to see how typical businesses or standard businesses or any corporates that would give you an opportunity as an outsourced researcher to add to or bring information sets into their mix of managerial reports. So, what are those different opportunities that are there to work with the businesses for helping them in gathering information for the purpose of mix of managerial or internal information with external brought in information. How does it connect, and what are the different types of reports that require outside researchers to interact or to work with as an opportunity to work with the businesses? That's what we will be discussing next, uh, which is day after tomorrow. We have regular classes now this week. Monday, today we've done this, then we've got Wednesday, and we've got Friday. So, with this, I would say that let's just conclude our session for today. Any questions?
Not for me.
Oh, that was
All
great.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. All set? No problems?
Yep, all good.
Okay. You didn't fall asleep, did you, sir?
No,
It's 2:40. All right. Okay, so my throat is all dry now. There's a
not
lot of
sure.
thing I had to do. I got it. All right. So thank you so much for your patience, for your time, and for giving your evenings. And I'll see you day after tomorrow. Thanks
See you
again.
Wednesday. Good
Bye.
night.
Thanks,
Good
Mandeep.
night.
See
Good
you, man.
evening.
Wednesday.
Bye,
Good
everyone.
evening.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.